Hello and welcome to the Wisden T20 World Cup daily podcast. Afghanistan almost pulled off a stunning heist against Australia, but still did England a net run rate favour by pushing the hosts to the wire, while New Zealand became the first team to book their place in the semi-finals with a comfortable win over Ireland. With me to discuss both those games are ESPNcricinfo's Matt Roller and Wisden Cricket Monthly Editor-in-Chief Phil Walker. Matt, that at the end from Rashid Khan was something special, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, and it kept Afghanistan's hopes very much alive, and sort of by proxy Sri Lanka's as well, because Sri Lanka were relying on Afghanistan to beat Australia to have a chance of getting through, and there would have been a point. I don't know where they were watching it, presumably some hotel somewhere in Sydney, where they would probably have been jumping up out of their seats and thinking they had half a chance. I think Australia obviously needed to win as big as they could. And there was a point when Afghanistan lost, I think, 4 for 4, where it looked as though they were on course to actually, if Afghanistan had properly collapsed, then Australia could have put themselves in a position where England had a bit of scoring pressure tomorrow beyond what they'll have in the game itself. As it happens, Rashid couldn't quite get them over the line, but I suppose it did invite questions as to why Afghanistan have used him sort of so low down the order in this World Cup. I think he was coming in at number 8 today, and while he might not be the best player of spin, I think he's clearly a pretty destructive guy, and it feels like when you have a superstar like him in your squad, especially playing at his sort of adopted home ground as well at the Adelaide Oval, where he knows the dimensions pretty well. Maybe he was a little bit wasted down the order.
Yeah, a weird one, because I guess Afghanistan have had an unlucky tournament on the whole with the 2 washouts, but they will have come here, they've come here wanting to, make the semis, win the whole thing, but to not get one win at all is quite a disappointment, really. And I guess they will be frustrated, especially having got so close, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think particularly having sort of flickered a little bit at the last T20 World Cup. I think there was a point in their game against Pakistan in the last T20 World Cup where they were really in the game and probably favourites at one point before Asif Ali sort of memorably hit a load of sixes right at the death to win the game. But I think across the last 2 World Cups, given the experience that some of their more, some of their senior players have got playing around the world in a variety of different conditions, given the number of their players that have played a lot of cricket in the Big Bash, for example, they'll probably be relatively disappointed to be leaving without a win. But it feels like they probably more so than anyone else in the tournament, I would say, it feels like they've been screwed over completely by the weather. I think, to have played 1 game in Perth and then had, I think, 10 days until their next game, that was never really going to suit. And particularly when, it's one of those strange things about the format, actually, is that they probably weren't particularly well served by the fact that they went into that game against England quite cold. So in a strange sense, by qualifying automatically for the Super 12s, it meant that they had a lot less relevant match preparation heading into this tournament than they would have done if they come first or second in their preliminary group and come through as a result of that. So yeah, I feel as though they'll probably be ruining a missed opportunity in this tournament. I don't think they were necessarily many people's tips to reach the semi-finals, but I think they promised a little bit more than they ended up delivering, but will also feel mugged off by the rain, I think.
Phil, I think that might be the longest we've gone in a podcast before coming to you.
It felt good though.
Yeah,
it's so refreshing to have someone on the show who actually knows what they're talking about.
Yeah. Well, let's ask you something anyway.
What, me this time?
Yeah.
Oh, right, lovely.
So
yeah,
Australia made 3 changes this game. Aaron Finch and Tim David both injured, and if they do make the semis, that will obviously be something that comes into play then. But they left out Mitchell Starc and picked Kane Richardson instead, and this
didn't work out for them.
No. What did you make of the call, I guess, at the time? And do you think in hindsight, if they do make the semis, will he be straight back in, do you think?
Well, cards on the table. When they did make the call, I was sound asleep in bed.
Okay.
When they made the actual decision. To not play Mitchell Starc against Afghan's hitters, to me, is a peculiar decision. I like Kane Richardson as a bowler a lot. It felt a little bit medium fast in the slot for me. And to those short, wide boundaries, Rashid in particular climbed into him, made him look a bit of a mug, to be honest, this morning. Overall, watching Australia, there was a strange sort of melancholy around the whole setup, and listening to the commentary as well. Michael Clarke was doing his best, from that peculiar position that they have now with one of the commentators down at pitch level at deep mid-wicket, and he was desperately trying to convince himself that there was great jeopardy at play here in this game. But that you could get that sense that on the pitch, they were wrestling with themselves. They know, as Ponting acknowledged a couple of days ago, that they only have themselves to blame to have got themselves in this position, to have got beat so heavily, and then to have somehow let slip that Ireland game when Ireland were 20 for 5 to get Ireland up to a respectable defeat, which would have really helped Australia's net run rate if they'd put the foot on the gas in that particular game. They've played very erratic cricket from start to finish. And what you saw today was another example of it, really. It was an innings that chugged along, didn't really go anywhere, until Maxwell did his thing, which again is all too rare for Australia's comfort, I think. And you could see the way that they walked off afterwards. They knew that, okay, they'd got away with one, in as much as they'd at least got 2 points on the board, having been close to blowing up completely at one stage. I mean, halfway through Afghanistan's innings, they were probably slight favourites. And when Rashid Khan was going hard, there was also the chance that Australia would implode completely. That said, just because they got over the line by a nose, you could see the way that they were reacting afterwards. And Maxwell's interview was very downcast. Now, the huge asterisk against this is that if we're recording this show 24 hours later, Australia could be cock a hoop and thinking, all right, well, we'll take on India in the semi and see where we go. As we've said on this show before, the line from the start of a tournament to the winner's enclosure is never, or very rarely, a smooth and straight one. England still have to get that job done tomorrow, and there's absolutely no guarantees that they're going to pull that off, and no doubt we're going to come to that. But I would imagine, looking at the body language among the Australian side, they feel like this one has slipped away from them.
Yeah, Matt, I know you want to talk about the approach and also just like the net run rate stuff in general, which was a bit silly, I guess. Everyone was talking about this 106 number, which wasn't actually the number that Australia needed to get past. I mean, obviously, the fewer they kept Afghanistan to, the better. And then for a moment, it seems as if Afghanistan might get bowled out between then and 118, which was the actual number would have brought net run rate into play. But still, it kind of felt as if Australia were maybe kind of like once that had got slipped, that was almost where they basically lost focus in a way, I guess, and also that they kind of failed to manage net run rate almost throughout, obviously, the competition, but this game as well, when they could have gone harder and they could have gone for the kill earlier and backed themselves to win the game come what may, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose it's a strange one in that, if they'd gone about the game in a sort of hugely gung-ho way, we might be sitting here sort of, criticising the fact that they went way too hard and they lost to Afghanistan and knocked themselves out when they could have, backed Sri Lanka to win tomorrow, which is eminently possible. Even a sort of extremely one-sided looking T20 game on paper, you can always expect an upset, but Sri Lanka are a pretty strong side and won the Asia Cup earlier this year, so they clearly have a decent chance of beating England. What I would say is I would agree that Australia probably didn't go for the kill. And as Phil was saying actually about Starc, I think, much as he's not been brilliant in T20 cricket of late, if you're looking at it as a one-off game where the best way to restrict a side and blow them away, I guess, is to take new ball wickets, to leave out someone who bowls at 145 Ks and swings the new ball in favour of someone who mainly bowls at the death in Kane Richardson and is that much slower. It does seem like a really odd call, and I think the general reaction around it seems to sort of concur with that view, I think. But yeah, it was strange. It kind of felt very much throughout David Warner's innings like he was very conscious of going very, very hard and wanting to turn every single into two, every two into three, take on every overthrow that was on offer. And he was a little bit frenetic at times, but clearly was pretty focused on getting Australia to towards a score like 200 and setting the tone for that. I thought there were just some weird calls through the middle. Like obviously Smith was sort of effectively forced to play because of the fact that they had two injured batters, but I thought sending him in at 4 when you had Stoinis and Maxwell and the sheds behind him was a slightly strange call given what Australia actually needed in the game. Maxwell faced 32 balls and was not out at the end, and you think he's probably one of their most explosive players. Could he not have come up slightly higher and just had access to more of the innings? And yeah, with the ball, they sort of, I don't know, I never really felt as though they were attacking enough to bowl Afghanistan out cheaply. And I think it was one of those strange things of not quite knowing exactly what they needed to do, which meant that they therefore it was sort of neither one thing nor another. But yeah, I do think it's worth sort of saying as well that it is a major disadvantage, and I'm quite surprised, to be honest, that it's worked out that the hosts didn't play the last game of the group stage, because I feel as though that would be a completely justifiable thing to happen in an ICC event, is that given there is such an advantage of playing last, because you know exactly what you need to do. You know, England don't need to know that they can go into tomorrow's game not needing to worry about whether they win in 18 overs or 10 overs or by 10 runs or by 30 runs. They just need to win the game and they're through. And as a result, that's a huge advantage over the situation Australia were in. So I don't know whether there's I don't realistically think there's any prospect of the format changing, so you play all three group game or all of the last round of group games simultaneously, just because I don't think it works from a sort of broadcast point of view. But it does seem a little bit odd to me that Australia have been handed such a major disadvantage given their hosts.
Yeah, absolutely fair call. I just want a little nod to David Warner's bizarre dismissal just before we leave this game alone. And look, in brackets, if England do get over the line tomorrow, the post-mortem of Australia's botched World Cup campaign doesn't really register with what's happened today. It happens in previous weeks. I think it happens in previous games. That New Zealand game will go down in legend if England do get over the line tomorrow. You know, that's a real epoch-marked game for New Zealand. And going through that Australian side, by the way, you do wonder if there will be a sort of a shifting of the guard. Now, I know Matthew Wade has been an outstanding finisher in the last 12 months or so, but he's creaking a little bit as a cricketer. Steve Smith is a weird sort of carbuncle now on their top 4 or 5. It doesn't really make much sense that he retains his place in that side. I know they've had a couple of injuries, hence why he's playing today. That said, you do feel like there will be an expectation that they will shift and change tack a little bit. You know, they picked their test squad and won it last year. They've done something relatively similar this time round. I think there will have to be a change of emphasis, I think, in their game. But anyway, look, just on the Warner thing, very briefly. Folks, if you have not seen it, go and watch it. Just when you think you've seen everything in the game of cricket, something else throws itself up. David Warner is a very left-handed batsman. We know that he has a great switch hit in his locker. But what he decided to do this time round, I think he got to 20-odd. Mm-hmm. He turned around to play the switch hit, got duped by a slower ball and ended up trying to sort of push it right-handed into the covers and missed an off-cutter to be bowled top of off stump. Utterly bizarre.
Well, top of leg stump in a way.
Leg stump. Like, sorry, yeah.
Really,
yeah.
It was.
I always get scrambled with the offs and the legs when we're flipping things around.
It obviously did look silly when you're not defending it and then it bowls you. It was a really good piece of bowling.
It was superb because
to adjust that quickly to bowl what's a brilliant ball to a right-hander, basically.
For sure. And perhaps Naveen Ul-Haq delivered it. Perhaps in the fullness of time we need to credit the bowler rather than lampoon Warner. But it's so much more tempting and delicious to go with the latter option on that. But yeah, look, if you haven't seen it, go and watch it. It's very odd. He looks like a very bad right-handed number 9. Just trying to get off the mark and being upended rather foolishly.
Yeah, he did once bat right-handed during a BPL game. Just he took guard right-handed.
Sure, I know, and
yes.
Famously, you know, he launched one on his debut, didn't he? 80-odd yards. I'm not saying he can't do it right-handed, but when you end up just looking a little bit flimsy and a bit timid, pushing into the offside, having switched yourself around, it can look quite funny. Look. Let's leave that game alone, Ben, because it won't leave much mark on this tournament, I don't think.
Okay. Well, let's talk a bit about England and that game tomorrow then. So Sri Lanka are now out. England know they just need to win to go through. Phil, does that benefit them, or is that sort of COD psychology?
Right, so we're into kind of naff sporting cliche corner, aren't we? Because you had a big grin on your face, thinking, okay, you know, I understand the way these things work. It was good that Australia won the game, albeit only by a small margin. Because then Sri Lanka turn up tomorrow and think, oh, well, I can't be arsed with this. Let's, sod this for a game of soldiers.
Exactly that, yeah.
Sure. It doesn't work like that. It's the bat and the ball. To think that when you're playing in front of a full house or a relatively full house, with a seriously vociferous Sri Lankan contingent at Sydney under lights against the English in your final game of a tournament where they've flickered and done okay, to think for a second that they're going to be indifferent to the outcome of that cricket match, I'm not having that cliche. I just don't see it like that. You could easily argue the toss one way or t'other as well. You could say, okay, well, it releases them up because there's not that much pressure on it. You know, this is not a state occasion for Sri Lanka's cricketers, and so perhaps they can just loosen the shoulders rather than tense up come the when we're down the pipe of whatever happens in this game tomorrow. So I don't really think that plays much of a role. I think it comes down to who performs on the day.
And obviously Chris Silverwood, the grudge match as well, Matt.
The Spoons Derby, as he called it earlier. Is that right?
The Spoons Redemption Derby. Yeah, it's going to be quite something. I actually, out of all people, I was on a Zoom call with Paul Farbrace this morning, who's obviously been in exactly the same position as an Englishman coaching Sri Lanka. And he was sort of very clear and obviously worked with Chris Silverwood during their England days as well, when Silverwood was bowling coach and Farbrace was assistant coach. And it was very clear that it's one of those where much as there'll be a few comments and it'll be nice to see some familiar faces and that sort of thing, he was pretty clear that Silverwood will be very determined to get one over on England, and not so much prove a point, because I think he's still quite well respected within the England camp, despite the sort of obvious the nature of the way his tenure ended in the Ashes last winter. But just to sort of remind people that he's a pretty good coach, and despite the fact that it didn't work out for him with England, that's not to say he can't do well with Sri Lanka. But yeah, I think he'll be like Phil says, I think it'll be a very good game. It sounds like it's going to be a used pitch at the SCG, which is sort of traditionally the most spin-friendly venue in Australia, I think. And Sri Lanka obviously have a couple of pretty gun spinners in Theekshana and Hasaranga. So I think there's been a certain level of assumption probably today when working out scenarios that Australia had to win because England probably will win on Saturday, but I don't necessarily see it that way. I think England will still have to play pretty well, and their tournament so far they've very much blown hot and cold. They bowled well and batted poorly against Afghanistan, bowled poorly and batted poorly against Ireland, and then batted well and bowled well against New Zealand. So they're sort of a 50% hit rate at the moment, and we'll be hoping that they can glue both parts together tomorrow and scrap into the semis. But yeah, I suppose it's got to the point where it's been sort of relatively similar, and I think people have drawn comparisons already to the 2019 50 over World Cup, where having had that stumble, it suddenly all became very clear that you just need to win 3 or 4 games in a row, 3 at this point for England, having beaten New Zealand, and that's all you need to do. And I think that will hopefully free some players up, and hopefully I think it should be a tight game.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's in any way in the bag, and I think if England's middle order get a little bit too excited by boundaries that they can actually see on the horizon rather than at the MCG where it's absolutely miles away, and they think, okay, well, it's time to flex these well-honed muscles of ours again, then they could come unstuck. If they go too hard too soon, especially if they bat first, that to me would be the concern. I would like to see them chase actually tomorrow. I think they're overall a better chasing side. I think they can do it both ways, but I would prefer in a real pressure game when you know what you need and you can be led by Buttler and he can adapt accordingly to what's required. Personally, I would prefer to see them chase tomorrow. And whether they chase or whether they set, just don't go too hard too soon. Don't be completely beholden to this philosophy in capital letters that they have emblazoned across every dressing room that they walk in. This is how we do it. Just be a wee bit careful, I think, tomorrow, because they could come unstuck if they go too hard too soon.
Yeah, and it's that spin attack that really scares me. I feel like that might be the best spin attack in the world, unless I'm forgetting someone. I think it probably is Hasaranga and Theekshana.
Also, some very useful seamers as well. Kamara is an outstanding seamer, I think. So they are a very, very dangerous side. Batting-wise, Mendes has played quite nicely. Nisanka's done okay at a kind of slowish, slightly sluggish strike rate, but he's got runs here and there. Their middle order hasn't really clicked yet. So So I think that the first third of England's bowling innings will be key to how they go. Hasaranga is a destructive number 6-7, but he hasn't got going yet in this tournament with the bat. But look, they are dangerous. No doubt they're dangerous from top to bottom.
Well, let's talk about the other game that happened today. New Zealand beat Ireland by 35 runs to book their place in the semi-finals. Matt, when people were sort of previewing this tournament, New Zealand were perhaps, even though the finalists last time around were maybe not people saying they're out of it, but probably just like a third favourite to go through. They're now the first team to qualify for the semis. Unless England win by like 125 runs, they'll be top of the group. They always do this, don't they? They turn up at IC events and pull something together and are always kind of more competitive and best than people sort of think they're going to be, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's the third time in a row they've qualified for the semis of the T20 World Cup, and despite the fact that they don't have a franchise style tournament at home, and despite the fact that they are sort of pretty used to being low expectations going into these events, or maybe their own expectations probably aren't that low, but as in I think it's quite an easy thing for media to say they look all right, but sort of plucky underdogs. But yeah, they probably deserve to be slightly above that status, and especially with Kane Williamson scoring some runs at a decent clip today, I think that's quite a big thing for them, and I think they'll be a dangerous team heading into the semi-finals. That said, I think they're a side that having sort of said that the media always write them off, I think they could well be the weakest of the four semi-finalists as it gets to it. In terms of, I think the other semi-finalists would probably be saying we'd rather play New Zealand than potentially an England team who have won 2 in a row. So it's a slightly tricky team to analyze, I think, because I think they play a sort of, I think to be fair, one of the things I would say about New Zealand is I think they're probably one of the most adaptable teams in terms of being able to play a lot of different styles of cricket. So they have obviously Finn Allen always goes really hard at the top, but then through the middle they have quite a few adaptable players. I think particularly Conway and Phillips have both shown during the World Cup how good they are as T20 batters, and I think will probably fetch pretty good IPL money in the future, because of the fact that they, both of those guys have grown up playing on, Conway less so, but both of those two played domestic cricket at home on tiny grounds, and then coming to this World Cup have played on massive ones and have run really well, used the gaps, worked twos, but both have the power to score boundaries as well. So I think, I think they're a dangerous side, but I think, it just looked like a fairly clinical win against Ireland this morning.
Phil, Kane Williamson hit 61. Went 6-4-6 to get past half-century. It's his highest score since the last T20 World Cup final. Is he back? Did he ever leave?
He struggled for 2 years in T20 cricket. At domestic level, it's been agonising at times to watch him. He's a big match player, though. He's a big tournament player. And as we said the other day, when he made 40 from 40, and it was argued on our show whether it was actually good for New Zealand when he got out at that point against England. I didn't personally see it like that, because even though he would have liked to have been 50 from 40, he was still doing a sensible job in the slipstream of Glenn Phillips at the time. He could have easily ended up with 65 from 45 in that innings, just as you saw in the final last year, right? When he played a one-man show. He probably needed that knock today for sure. And it will probably make him inwardly, not that he gives any information outwardly, but inwardly he'll probably be feeling a little bit better about life, having loosened his shoulders a little bit. I hear what Matt's saying. By a nose, they're perhaps the weakest of the expected four, but only by a nose, really. You saw the two spinners against England. They went at a run a ball against England. They have obviously two all-timers who take the new ball. And okay, Southee is not Bumrah for sure, but they know their way around any form of cricket. They have Lockie Ferguson, who's a potential match winner as well, and they have a very adaptable batting lineup. Devon Conway is one of my favourite players around in the game, and since that astonishingly good 90-odd against Australia, he's only really flickered. But look, they can beat anybody on their day. That's why this tournament is so much fun, because you are really throwing the cards up in the air come the semi-finals and seeing which ones land.
Yeah, and Santner bowled really, really well today, actually. And when you talk about adaptability, he's really clever in terms of how much he mixes up his pace. Like some of his balls were really slow. and Ireland didn't really know what to do. And when we were talking about the England win against New Zealand, talking about England's batting and saying like, oh, why don't they just go harder at him? He is quite a hard bowler to attack. Like I think you might struggle if you just try and hit him out the park from ball one. But on Ireland, I guess the highlight for them was Josh Little taking a hat-trick. Yeah, depending on how you feel about Curtis Campher's 4 and 4, they've taken either 33% or 42% of all T20 World Cup hat-tricks in history.
And there you go, Matt. This is why we have to just bow down to the man's superior geekery. That is extraordinary, even for your standards, Gardner.
But
I have to say,
you like the look of Josh Little, Phil?
I do very much. Yeah, obviously he was. I mean, probably Rollers interviewed his dad 3 years ago. But to me, I'd never heard of him before this summer, and he turned up and tore it up in the 100. He's a very, very likable bowler. He's got a very nice action, very straight lines, left arm, got a bit of pace and a bit of height, and he picked up a quality hat trick today. Okay, Williamson was caught on the boundary, but then the two lefties came in, Neesham and Santner, and he cleaned them both up, beat them both for pace, hit them on the back leg, and they were both taken out middle and off. The boy can clearly bowl, and what you're seeing with Ireland, I think, in Tector and in Balbirnie and in the other lad whose name I forget, which is just like Tector. Tucker, thank you. You can keep that in. I don't even care anymore. You're seeing, and Mark Adair as well, you're seeing, and McCarthy. These are cricketers who, many of whom, with the exception maybe of Balbirnie, we didn't really know too much about them, say 5 years ago. And there was a sense that with Irish cricket, that they were losing that goldenish era, that it was beginning to fade a little bit. Well, what we're seeing is that while they might not have a huge swathe of talented cricketers that they can pick from, depth-wise, they might not be where they would like to be and where I genuinely think they will be in 10 years. But they're still bringing talented cricketers through that can compete at this level. They've played some really good cricket. They won that game against England fair and square, and they've pushed other teams quite closely. They lost today by, 25-30, chasing 180. If Sterling had fired a bit more, they'd have won another game or two as well. They absolutely deserve their place in the short formats. They completely deserve their place on the top table, and we've been seeing it. As Matt likes to say, the T20 democratizes the game, and we're seeing it week after week, day after day. Yeah,
it's been hard for me to work out how to summarise Ireland's campaign because, as you say, look, they beat England. Obviously, that's great, and they pushed another couple of teams close, but then one win in the Super 12s, and I guess the thing that the complication is that they went into today with a massive win that could have pushed them into the semi-finals possibly, and then with any sort of win that can get them into the top four and get them automatic qualification for next time. And as it is, they're now probably going to have to qualify for next the 2024 event and unless Netherlands do themselves and Ireland a favour tomorrow, it'll be two of Netherlands, Ireland and Scotland who go to that event. So as much say they deserve their place, and they obviously do, we could well be in a position where they're not at the next T20 World Cup without much fault of their own.
All hail the ICC.
It's an absolute joke that I think it's worth dwelling on that, the idea that one of those three teams having, all that they've provided us with this tournament. You look at Scotland beating West Indies, then Netherlands having their own sort of famous wins and getting through the group stage and all this sort of thing. It's like the idea that none of those are going to add anything to the next tournament, and one of them has to miss out so that you can have an extra place for some, for another associate. And I would have everyone in as many teams in as possible. To be honest, I'd want the World Cup as big as possible. But yeah, the idea that none of those three are in the top 20 teams and should be at the World Cup, I think is an absolute joke. But
yeah, diplomatically put, it's a load of old bollocks.
Yeah. Well, that seems like a good place to end it. Join us tomorrow when we'll be looking at either England's dreadful T20 World Cup campaign coming to a close or their inevitable march to the title. Cheers.
Cheers for coming, Matt, by the way. Thanks for being on that. What a day. Paul Farbrace in the morning, Ben and Gardner in the afternoon, and then on the same seven-a-side team as me this evening. I'll see you later.
It's actually a dream. Cheers, lads.